So welcome to the college, everybody. I'm Wendy Byrne, I'm the current president, and tonight we have three people who are all hoping to take over from me. This is the first time we've held a hustings event at the college. We're going to answer questions tonight. There are some questions that already come in, and I will take questions from the audience. The event is being filmed and will be put up on the website hopefully tomorrow. If there's anybody here who doesn't wish to be filmed, who doesn't wish to appear on the film, can you please let one of the members of staff know, and we'll make sure that you don't. So we're going to begin by hearing from all the candidates. They'll be in alphabetical order, and they're each going to have 5 minutes to say what they would do if they were elected and why you should vote for them. So we'll start with the first one, Professor Cambieu.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thank you to the college executive and officers for organising such a transparent and progressive process for the elections. It's been quite fun up till now, and I've had much discussion. But I want to share my motivations to enter psychiatry and stand as president, as the values of the next president are probably as important to you as their distinct leadership styles or commitment to equalities or experiences of implementing evidence in practice and of community services. So I knew psychiatry was for me when, as a medical student, I was asked to spend a week with a young black man who'd been sleeping under the bridge at Walworth Road. And I visited his sleep sites, the benefits offices, negotiated leave, saw firsthand the web of causation and oppression that had led to his mental illness, as well as hindered his recovery. I've never forgotten him, his name, and likely he motivated me to spend more time in adult services, working in a homelessness team also at one stage, and in primary care and psychotherapy services in East London, where I've been for over 30 years. Members of my family have also struggled with mental illness, and I've been a carer, so I felt how society and services can become hostile and hinder recovery. So it matters to me a lot, and I will be committed to working with patients, the communities of practice, the college, my colleagues here, and government departments to make our system of care kinder and more compassionate, and to listen more to those who are silenced and have hidden voices. We should be proud and confident as a college. We've had remarkable achievements recently on national policy, investment, teaching and recruitment in psychiatry. Yet so many of you tell me there is much more to do. Everyday battles to get young people, older people and people with intellectual disabilities into services, bed shortages, rising suicide rates with inquiries, long waiting lists, the 40% cuts in addiction budgets, a shortage of psychiatrists, insufficient time to train doctors and students, and many not staying in psychiatry. Feeling disempowered and being asked to act like technicians carrying risk rather than being a skilled therapist, clinician or scientist or a leader. And fragmented body, mind and community services that we all have to tackle and try and provide some cohesion and unity in the journey that patients experience. All are pressing issues, but I want to see a confident clinician. I want to see a more united, inclusive and influential college, and influential through knowledge and through collaborative leadership. So I want a more connected college, spreading learning and innovation across devolved nations and faculties and divisions and special interest group with a proportionate shift in resources. The devolved nations have special contexts that we perhaps don't fully accommodate in our English policies and English thinking. I've championed anti-racist and anti-discriminatory practice in my entire working career and still shape policy and practice. We must tackle the ways that power and resources sustain inequalities by age, gender, sexual orientation and other characteristics in society, in services and in the college. I will provide more skill support and recognition of our international membership, our remarkable global faculty and training and non-training grades. Locum and independent doctors, all are critical for sustainable solutions. I wish to promote an evidence-based grounding to all college activities. We must listen to many forms of evidence, including patient stories. I've been an editor with the BJ for 6 years, the third most cited psychiatric journals, and my aim has been to get evidence into practice across all specialities and geographical areas, to make science accessible, to raise ethical dilemmas, and to promote research integrity, and we're setting up some committees to do just that. But research does not always lead to change. We need to complementary approaches as well, like quality improvement. How many local clinicians see data in real time and use it to review performance and support negotiations with commissioners? We need college involvement in local place-based systems. That's the new transformation agenda. Of course, CCQI and the National Collaborative Centre do a great deal of work, but we need to do more locally and be implementing more. We need to ensure psychiatry is at the heart of reform in the mental health sector, at the heart of medicine and society, and tackle stigma and improve recruitment and retention. Imagine if the 80% of the membership who are disengaged, these are apparently the figures, were active and involved locally in their local systems. So I want to improve morale and skills by local workshops through regions with commensurate shifts in resources to promote you as collaborative systems leaders in your localities. In England, certainly quite a lot of investment is coming. We have to be ready for that, prepared. We must explain better what we do as psychiatrists and skill up and adapt to the digital opportunities too. What would make a difference to the young black man that I saw sleeping under the bridge over the life course? Of course, perinatal services, child and adolescent, crisis and homeless services, early intervention and rehab, and if you were lucky enough to live till 65, integrated old age and care services. So I want a more united, inclusive and influential college, and that would lead to better care for patients and carers, a better work-life wisdom for psychiatrists. So this is your chance to participate and shape the future. I would be honoured to be your president, and of course I hope you vote for me, but do vote and contribute your knowledge and views. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we're going to hear from Adrian James.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to all of you for giving up your time to come here today to participate in this presidential election. I'm honoured to be here. I find it slightly surprising that I'm here in many ways when I consider where I came from. And I'm also honoured to stand alongside two other fantastic candidates. I hope that you will vote, and I hope that you'll vote for the person you believe to be best. But I'd really appreciate you supporting me to be the next president of the Royal College. I'm proud to be a psychiatrist, and for me, psychiatry is the best, most intellectually stimulating and rewarding specialty. We've all been fighting for a better deal for mental health, and that's starting to make a difference. The public rightly see mental illness at the top of their health priorities. The polls tell us that. And politicians and policymakers have moved a long way. Again, something I've personally seen. But that needs to translate into more resources for frontline services and research. And we need to turn rhetoric into reality to get a fair deal for our patients. I want to be absolutely clear that I do understand that it is very tough on the front line. Demands are increasing, resources are often scarce, and our members are under constant strain. It often feels like a serious untoward incident inquiry is just round the corner, and many of our members are demoralised, and too many are leaving, and this is unacceptable. So if you elect me as your president, my three priorities will be as follows. First, equity between physical health and mental health. This must extend to both clinical services and research. It is unacceptable that mental illness is 23% of the disease burden, and we get 13% of the funding and 7% of the research funding. It's unacceptable, and it has to change. And I believe I know what is needed, and I have campaigning experience. And where there has been investment in some specialties, you will know what they are: liaison, perinatal, to some degree CAMS, and in fact my own specialty of forensic psychiatry. Psychiatrists have shown that this brings positive results for patients. However, the majority have received little or no extra funding, and in some cases things are worse. So it's time to fill those gaps, and I'll develop a plan to achieve true parity. I believe it has been necessary to focus on some areas to show that we can show real benefit when you do invest. But now is the time for a comprehensive plan, and we need to see what parity really looks like, the end result of this. So we need the service models, we need to know what workforce we need to know what money is necessary, we need a delivery plan, and we need a time scale. So we need to know when the end is, because I believe our members are getting fed up with this, and more importantly, so are service users. I believe that I have the experience and capability to do this. I've been a frontline clinician for 33 years. As a registrar for 4 years, I've led the college in policy and communications and been deputy to 2 presidents. I've chaired the main policy and communications committees at the college. I've campaigned in the media, appeared on Today programme, live news, front page of the newspaper, not always intended, I have to say, but sometimes that happens. And I've campaigned through the college's Westminster Parliamentary Committee. I attended 3 main party conferences on 5 consecutive years, attending all of them, and I went to the SNP conference as well. And I developed constructive relationships with ministers and MPs across the political spectrum. Through college roles over the last 20 years, I've listened to the experiences of members, and I've also experienced mental illness myself. So I've advised commissioners, and as a clinical director for mental health and dementia in the South West, and as former medical director of my trust, I understand the challenges of putting policy into practice. Second, recruitment and retention. Recruitment is improving thanks to your efforts and the college's Choose Psychiatry campaign, but we need to build on that success and address retention. We lose too many psychiatrists and too many trainees. This means that we focus on well-being, and our members are under great stress. And I see there's a sort of a hierarchy of need around well-being, and it starts with a decent, durable job that's properly resourced, a safe environment physically and psychologically, so that we can say it as it is and we can report mistakes, that teams that support each other, and the opportunity to really do the very best. Finish. So, and finally, I will major on diversity, because I believe that there are too many people in society. Our members, we have very great role models who have done great things, but we need a proper evidence-based plan, and I believe I have that plan, both for our members to properly engage, but also for our patients who are often disadvantaged to get the best out of services. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, the organisers and everyone here. Now, it must be a relief for you, those of you who've looked at the college website, to see us all in real life. I'm referring, of course, to our video stills on the website. To be fair to the college as an equal opportunity organisation, we've all been caught in equally alarming gurns. And as you can see, we're all quite presentable. Now, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but you'd probably be fine with just any of us as president. And indeed, if I were to be elected, I'd want to find a way of involving these other two in going forward. Each of us brings a lot of relevant experience to the field. Each of us is passionate about psychiatry and its importance, and about parity of esteem for our patients. But I'd go beyond equity between physical and mental health and take back our core concern. There's no health without mental health. That used to be our mantra. Where's it gone? It doesn't seem to be on our website or on our logo anymore. And in case there's anyone who doubts that principle, I recommend time in liaison psychiatry. That's where I was before I went into forensic psychiatry. So let's focus for a moment on getting psychiatry into that leading place again. That leading place so that we can have a key to influencing, to recruitment and retention, to safeguarding and getting resources, to having the right expertise where and when it's needed, and to effective collaboration with everyone we seek to work with, and of course with everyone we seek to work for as well. Now, you may be aware that I'm not the establishment candidate, so far from being bound by existing college structures, I can be a little bit challenging. Now, did you know, for example, that the college strategy is currently required to be determined largely by the chief executive, who so far has never been a psychiatrist, talking with the officers and then drafting the strategy? Me neither until recently. I've already called for more membership involvement, and there's a commitment now to greater consultation in the next round of the college's strategic development, and I'd like you to help me ensure that that happens. Esteem for a profession, both self-esteem and regard from others, is crucial for the extent of recruitment and retention and influence that we want. In medicine, that comes from real advances in treatment, and they come from research. Survey after survey has shown how much most of us want to contribute to that, not just those who are highly academically trained, everyone. Similarly, researchers, the fully trained ones, can't make real advances without being grounded by practicing clinicians. Now, if we're going to achieve that glorious collaboration, it's only possible if there's a strong academic infrastructure. And UK-wide, psychiatry's academic infrastructure has been decimated. A priority for me is for the college to push to its restoration and growth. We also need to become much more savvy about the real economics of healthcare and really lead service developments. There's much talk of evidence-based practice, but too often it's governments that set the strategies, and we're put in the position of merely collaborating on their implementation. So-called cost savings, which we've had to deal with a lot lately, often merely pass a heavy burden from a government departmental budget onto the most vulnerable people, who then need more rather than less services, and then end up failing to access anything at all. Some die, most suffer a lot more. We've seen one of our most important specialties, the addictions, lose resource to the third sector agencies. Is that strategy working? How often do we have the real measure of such draconian change? We need to seize real leadership in such matters. The college has now devolved offices to Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. Working in Wales, I'm surprised by how much of the so-called central college business focuses on England. Good relationships between governments and parts of the college are essential to local service delivery, but it's our collective knowledge and experience as psychiatrists that's essential to the centrality of psychiatry and mental health. I'd like to open discussion on seizing the moment and perhaps have an English council so that the college becomes a truly overarching UK embracing body which would be truly able to lead optimal mental health policies across the UK and maybe even worldwide. So some radical ideas, huge ambition, but maybe we could get there.
Thank you. So 3 very different but challenging and interesting presentations. So we're now at the point in the evening when we address the questions from our members, both people in the room and the ones who couldn't make it tonight. We've had a huge number of questions sent in, some of them very detailed, very long, quite a lot of them overlapping. So I've tried to distill out the main points, and I've got a list of written questions, and we'll alternate these with questions from the audience. I don't think we're going to get through everything, but we'll have a system whereby the candidates can answer questions on the website online afterwards. We're going to be tight on time here. Our candidates only have 2 minutes maximum on each answer. And Bex, you're going to time that, aren't you? Yeah, with your cards. Okay. And we're going to take in turns with who answers first. And I shall have to make a note or I'll get confused. So, so the first question, we'll sort of work round and we'll start with you. If you can give the first answer, Cam, but each of you have 2 minutes to answer this question. So this question won't be a surprise to any of you. The college is in London and is London-centric. Why is this, and what can be done to include members from outside London?
Well, I think that speaks to the nub of my presentation, my opening presentation, that actually 80% of the membership aren't engaged. They don't know what the college does for them. They're disconnected, they're feeling isolated, they're struggling in their local services, and they don't feel supported. I think a place-based approach is the only way forward. Monies are devolved locally, commissioners are local, the systems in which they operate are local, the personalities are local. You cross the river and the whole system changes, in London. And so I think it's absolutely right that we don't do enough. I think we should think about devolved offices around the country where people don't have to come to London. And even this hustings I did raise with colleagues that perhaps we should have done several around the country, but it's experimental, it's the first time, so it's got to be fun and successful. And if it is, I'm sure we could devolve a series of hustings around the country. So I would agree with that.
Thanks, Wendy. Well, I'm sort of London born and bred, but I did leave London and I went to the Southwest and I chaired the Southwest Division. And for those of you who are on council will remember that people used to describe the Southwest Division as the People's Republic of the Southwest of England. And so I worked very effectively with colleagues who felt that they were perhaps on the margins and made sure that there was a real voice for all our members. I do dispute that the college doesn't try to engage. We now have devolved councils. Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland are very pleased with this. I've been to Scotland twice in the last 2 weeks. I've been to Wales earlier on this year and going to Belfast later on in the year. So we do engage with our members. We have 3,500 members come to our international congress, and we have 1,000 members who are engaged in committees. People often say, let's get rid of some of the committees in the college, but actually I say we have lots of our members who are contributing in that way. Now, we could always do more, and that's why I was very pleased to establish the post of an associate registrar for member engagement. Santosh Madolkar is here in the audience, and he is now working his way around all our groups in order to ensure that they really do have a voice. And I think things like our RCPsych Insight we've gone out of our way to make sure that members in all faculties, all divisions, all our countries are properly engaged, as well as our international members. But of course we could do more. I did actually try to take the trustee board to Scotland, but a different view was taken, and I think this sometimes is complex, but we do have offices in Scotland, we do have offices in Northern Ireland, and we do have offices in Wales, and I've been to them all.
Thank you. Pamela.
Thank you. So some very important points made. What I'd like to add is that we have a very good system of regional representation. Regional representatives are on the various faculty executives, the council, and do have a substantial role to play. And perhaps I can only speak for forensic psychiatry. We've been a little concerned that perhaps they're not as engaged as they might be. And so we've begun to ask why that is and what the college could do to support them rather more. One of the things that the college has been doing is to have a meeting for the chairs of regions in conjunction with council. But I think that would be a very important route to strengthen the role of the regional representatives and have them invite people from the central college activities to come and visit or engage them and provide them with what they need.
Thank you. So our next question, we will take one from the audience. Now we've got a roving mic. You've got the roving mic. Wow, everybody wants to ask a question. How am I going to decide this? Right, gentleman in the second row. There. Yep. I'll go backwards and forwards between the sides. But.
Thank you to all three of you. I'm sure you'd all make excellent presidents, but whoever does get to be the president will obviously be an important figurehead for psychiatry nationally. And I wonder what sort of key messages you would want to get to the wider public about psychiatry as a profession.
Thank you. So this one we will start with Adrian.
Thank you, John, for that question. I think it's absolutely vital that the president is out there. I've already shown that I can be out there in media and all around the country and internationally. But I think the patients need to know, and public need to know, that if they have a mental illness, that the Royal College of Psychiatrists is there for them and is not there for its members. Obviously, the vehicle to make things better for them is through our members, but they must absolutely be clear that the Royal College is there to improve outcomes and experience of anybody that develops a mental illness, and that includes things like prevention. They must know that we will argue for more resources and the very best possible services, and we must be visible in actually doing that. They must see us doing that. I think they would also expect us to be talking about stigma and how it's very important. We know that in terms of lack of access to services, stigma is the biggest factor. So we do need to have psychiatrists who are prepared to talk about their own mental illness, and in a way that means that people can actually talk about their own illness. So I think those are the main messages I would like to get across.
Pamela?
Yes, I think that it's really important that we do come across as a profession that we are sound in our medical identity and that we fully explain what that is, because I think some of the difficulties and the conflicts that sometimes arise is that people see doctors as purely physical or pill pushers or whatever, and I think one of the great strengths that we have is that we come from a very holistic background of training, and that we truly take account of the physical and the psychological and the social environment in which all these problems are embedded. And I think somehow we need to be much clearer about that, and then we would engage colleagues in related specialties, both in medicine and outside medicine, so much better. And I think that would be very reassuring for our patients and the wider public as well, and indeed all the other interesting professionals that we have to relate to in government, in my case, in the legal profession and so on.
Thank you.
I think the literacy on what is a mental illness and what is mental health, not least the terminology, is very poor out there. People don't really know in the public, and many professional groups don't know, and we're confusing them. We're using language that nobody really understands what we're talking about. Ordinary dysphoria, severe mental illness, something that needs medication, something that needs a psychological therapy. It's a very important role that the college has to improve health literacy and to ensure that we are scientific in our approach and have evidence to back up what we do, and that people see us as a medical discipline. I've said in my opening remarks that psychiatry should be at the heart of reform in the mental health sector as a collaborative leader, at the heart of medicine and at the heart of society. And what I meant by society was that of all the public health professionals and preventive interventions that people are promoting, they always leave out people with complex disorders, people living in places of inequality and deprivation. Psychiatrists are uniquely placed. We work with very complex situations, very complex environments, and we are very place-based, and we really work hard at that. And I think there's much more we could do, but I think it's important for the President to be a leader, to be local, to be available, to talk to the Trust, talk to the medical directors. Time's up.
Thank you. Okay, this is another question that's been sent in. This question was sent in various forms, so I've condensed it. The examinations that the college ran made an excess last year. What is your view about this? Why should trainees subsidise the college? Pamela, we start with you. Sorry.
Oh dear, I really don't have an answer to that one. I don't think trainees should subsidise the college. Obviously people have to pay in a fair way for exams, because running an examination is an expensive business if it's going to be done properly. And I think if there is an excess, then the college should review that and consider whether the excess can be ploughed into the next year. But even that might be unfair if the next year's students have it cheaper. It's very difficult to get that fair, but the college does need to look very carefully at the real costs of what it's doing, and make sure that nobody is paying excess.
Thank you.
I'd like to see what the excess is. I mean, the college is a charity and it's worked very hard to maintain its charitable objects in all spaces. It's pretty lean in many ways, so I'd like to see what the excess is. And if there is a substantial excess, I agree completely with the question that we shouldn't be subsidising other activities. My experience is that every time there is a surplus or an excess, that it's reinvested. So the conferences that we have, the congresses, if there is excess and it goes to faculties, the faculties often subsidise students and trainees to come to the congresses in the future rather than use those subsidies for other activities. So I think we could look into it and take it seriously, but I'm not sure it's as substantial a problem as is indicated.
Thank you. Adrian.
I think this is a very understandable concern and a very real perception. I do remember I failed my part one. I know this is being filmed, but I failed my part one, and actually I do remember my next visit to the college, there was scaffolding outside Belgrave Square, and I remember thinking, I paid for that. So I do feel the pain. The college does not aim to make money out of the exam. We already have a process that if we have more than even a sort of marginal excess, that it's invested back in things that are beneficial to our trainees. I was recently involved in a meeting with Ross, who is here, a new chair of the PTC, and his predecessor, where we discussed their concerns and we were very open and transparent. we must also remember that it's important that we develop our exam, and that does cost money, and that money needs to come from somewhere. So we do need to look at digitalising our exam. We're looking at making it more international. We have lots of international members. We're held in very high esteem in the international mental health community. We need to make it easier for people internationally to take part in our exams in as fair a way as possible, and that costs money. So we shouldn't make money out of the exam, we should reinvest, but we also need to look at developing our exam to make sure that we can maintain our position as having the best quality exam possible.
Thank you. So now we'll have another question from the room, from this side. Oh, Ian, you got your hand up really fast. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I believe one of the core functions of the college is in education and training. Where do you think we should be going with that part of the college's activity?
I think the college does a fantastic job in education and training, and it's got many avenues to offer high quality education and training in terms of the MRCpsych exam, certainly. There are suggestions that that's not really up to, it needs to be modernised in terms of other skills that trainees need in terms of management and commissioning skills and understanding data and feedback from data and digital opportunities. There's all sorts of suggestions that we should improve the MRCpsych. But in terms of the CPD offer, it's incredible. I mean, I think what we do for members is really good. The problem is not everyone is making use of that, I guess, other than receiving the journals on a regular basis and the Advances Journal, which is a great CPD offer, and CPD Online. I think we do need to go more digital. I think we actually have opportunities to diversify and work with other professions as well in a more active way. The Royal Society of Medicine, for example, is a very open house in terms of training.
Adrian?
I'd agree with what Cam has said. I think the college has done a huge amount, most importantly in training the best psychiatrists we possibly can, running a very good exam that has the confidence of our patients and our regulators, and we've done great work in terms of the public. The part of our website that's most visited is the bit that the public visit who want to actually find out about mental illness. And I had a patient the other day who's got into considerable debt, and I should know everything that's on the college website. I'm afraid I don't, but I did Google. The first place I went was the college website, and there's a huge amount of information about debt, for example. So there's a huge amount there. What could we do more? I think I've already talked about the exam and evolving that. I think we need to make more courses accessible within divisions. When I was chair of the division, we introduced Section 12 training within the division, and we need to make that more accessible, but particularly in the sort of nether regions of the college. We need to revise our leaflets. Actually, we need to make sure that they're properly up to date and that they do reflect the evidence. And I think we do need to continue to have a drive on differential attainment, which is a very big issue for those who are international medical graduates and people from black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds actually who qualified here as well. So I think there is more that we need to do, but actually I think we do a pretty good job.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, the question is huge and we've got 2 minutes. So I'd just say that I very much endorse the idea that the college has got a much wider education role than working with psychiatrists. There's the public, there are other disciplines and so forth. But of course, at the moment, it's a peculiarly critical time for us. And again, it's where we really need to have leadership, because the whole curriculum is being revised, not just the curriculum in psychiatry, but the curriculum across medicine. And one of the core issues in the redesign of the curriculum is that there should be much more flexibility in training across all of medicine. So that both creates difficulty and opportunity. Now, the opportunity it creates is that we can be sure to get more psychiatry into everybody else's curricula as well. But it does mean that we have to be very careful that our curriculum isn't dumbed down in order to make it too soft and too fluid, because we've got to be like little fetuses and ready to go in any direction based on our training. So I could go on a lot more, but I think for me those are the really crucial issues. I think it's a very exciting time, but we've got to grasp a lot of leadership there.
Thank you. So the next question is one that's come in advance. And this one, Adrian, you'll be the first one to answer. How will the candidate ensure that any position the college takes reflects the views of its members? If the college promotes a controversial view that the members object to, what should the mechanism be to provide a revision? An example of this is the position on gender dysphoria.
It's a very important issue, and the college is a charity, and we have a very well established mechanism for establishing what our policy is on each and every area that is relevant to us. Essentially, if people have a concern about a particular area, then anybody can initiate policy. It comes to the Policy and Public Affairs Committee and goes to the editorial board. And we have a robust process where we engage with our faculty chairs, divisional chairs, special interest groups where that's relevant, and people who have very particular roles within the college. So we set up a mechanism really led by Tim Ojo, who's in the audience, that is much more robust in terms of how we actually make sure that we engage all the members in order to give a view. Ultimately, it's council that makes that decision, and each and every member of the college has a representative on council. So that is your mechanism. Now, I guess people might be tempted to say, well, we should have a vote on things. Now, referenda haven't gone down too well recently, and I'm not sure they do give you the best results. I think our members need to make sure they're sufficiently engaged that they can trust those who have to look at things in great detail. Now, we should also be prepared to change our view. In fact, we have revised our policy documents in a whole variety of different areas, and we produce new policies. So the college must be open so that people can contact us. I get a lot of contact from members, I have to say. I'm very visible, and people are able to contact us. So I don't think anybody need feel that somehow that their concerns are not listened to. But I think we have a robust mechanism recently revised.
Well, I think we have to make a clear distinction between views and evidence-based positions. At the moment, the college really has position papers and reports, and Tim has already been mentioned, but we've begun to discuss whether we shouldn't have something called discussion papers, where it's more clear that the evidence doesn't necessarily enable us to come to a definitive conclusion, and therefore the obvious thing to do is to take a preliminary position, to engage others in discussion, and to actually invite feedback and be very much in a position of changing our view. Where there's fact, I think there's a different response, and there are many people who actually don't agree with facts. And that's much more tricky, but I think that takes us back to the previous question about education. And if we find that we've got a lot of people who are very concerned by a position which is well evidenced, then we have a bigger job in education.
Thank you.
Well, I think evidence could mean many things, and I think there are different forms of evidence. So I disagree slightly with my colleagues in that there are facts and there is evidence that we revere, like epidemiological evidence or trials evidence. But I also think people's views and perspectives and stories are really important. And I see disagreement and dispute as a signal that we haven't understood something, that something is wrong, that we haven't quite got the full picture, because people are speaking from a particular context or space in their lives, and we haven't understood that. In particular, I've done a lot of work on inequalities where there's a lot of contested evidence, and often it comes down to the divergent views emerge from people's biographies and histories. Taking it further, I'm not sure that college members really do feel that their views are heard. I agree with Adrian that people do contact us, do send us messages, do challenge. Twitter's been quite extraordinary, really, for challenging beliefs and views. I think we could do more, but personally, I think it has to be devolved beyond the devolved nations. I think it's a regional issue. The divisions themselves should be focused much more on local activities and engage with our membership. We mentioned that we get 1,000, 3,000 at the Congress, but we've got 18,000 members. It's not, people aren't really that engaged, and I keep making the point that 80% of our membership isn't really engaged and don't really get what we're doing. We should listen to that. We've got to hear that.
Thank you. We'll now take another question from the room, from this side of the room. Ah, Lade, a woman, right. Yeah. Where's the mic?
Thanks. I think it's already been said, any of you would make a good president. But in the last few years, the college has done a lot of work around equalities. And that's something very close to my heart. And I was very pleased to see the Black 50 posters outside, actually, with some very eminent black psychiatrists, very heartening. What will you do, if you're voted as president, to maintain what the college has done and improve what the college has done around equalities?
Gosh, that's a good question, because so much is happening already, but it's clearly a very important thing. We've got to keep the momentum going, and we've got to do more. One of the first things I'd want to do is to find out whether there are still some groups who feel that they're not being adequately heard. Clearly, some we are relating well to, others we may not be relating so well to, and to find out about that and to start to remedy that. I certainly feel that although I've a lot of experience both working with people from other cultures as colleagues, as patients, and visiting other cultures that I don't fully understand, and so I'm open to a lot more personal training and evidence. It's interesting, I've just got back from Italy, where I was keen to understand the very radical changes that there have been in Italian psychiatry, closing all the mental hospitals, doing away, as I understood it, with psychiatric beds. And I think it was necessary to be there to understand quite how isolated people with mental disorders had become in Italy, and therefore why there was such a huge reaction against psychiatry. And I think that speaks to us, that we need to be inclusive about people with mental disorder and think about how that might be affected with culture. So I'd certainly want to build on what the college has already started and understand much more myself.
Thank you.
So I've been involved in the equalities agenda my entire career, even as a medical student, when I read Maurice Lipsage's book with Roland Littlewood. And it's clear that this is not an easy problem to solve. We've known about inequalities in experience and outcome in people with mental illness for 20, 30 years and made very little progress. But I also know it's not just about race and ethnicity, it's about cluster disadvantage, it's about age and gender, it's about sexual orientation. It's the way the word power is never really talked about. Power and resources are used to sustain inequalities and to generate inequalities, and we're conditioned to not notice these things. So in my opening statement, I did say that we really need to look at the way power and resources are used to generate and sustain inequalities in society, in services, but also in the college. And there will be many examples where this will be played out. I can give you an example, which is my responsibility on an editorial board, where we know there's gender disparity in terms of the number of people, women who are present on the board, and number of international members. Now we're looking at that. It's probably the most animated discussion we've had on the board, actually. But people are very extreme in their views about whether we should be actively recruiting women or people from international, whether we should appoint on merit, how we go about this. A very important thing is that to start to look and not be so conditioned to the obvious processes and policies that we operate. If we ourselves can't resolve our own internal inequalities, we're not in a good position to do this externally with society at large. So I think we have to do it at all levels. So I would do, there have been reviews already within college practice and processes, but I would be very active in the communities as well. And the most stark finding, of course, is the difference in ethnic minority rates of mental illness and the way people have very coercive pathways into care if they are from an ethnic minority group. So we need to tackle that. I'm doing that in 4 regions already in the country, and have been doing a systems-based approach, working with commissioners and policymakers and trying to get them novelly to talk to patients and vice versa, so they share resources and power. Thank you. Time's up.
Thanks. I think the college does have much to be proud of, but we need to go much, much further. In relation to engaging our members, I would personally adopt some of the evidence-based processes that show that, enable people from diverse backgrounds to fully participate. And the evidence clearly shows not only it's right, but it's actually good for outcomes for organisation. There's a huge evidence base around this. I went to a talk by David Williams, who's Professor of Public Health at Harvard, and he very clearly outlined what organisations should do. So what would I do? I would have somebody on the trustee board who was there specifically, had the remit to look at diversity and how we engage all our members. We would have a member of staff who led on that in a very visible way. We would have a very clear plan that's monitored. We would have money that would reward projects that actually valued diversity, and we would have our leaders endlessly speaking up. So that's what I would do. In relation to our patients, I had discussions recently with NHS England about some of the changes that we're going through in terms of how services are run. And actually what people fail to do when we have these big system changes is to say, what will be the effect on the people who find it most difficult to access services of this service change? And that should be right at the top of the agenda when we actually do that. And it's often thought about later on, that people then might think later on, what's the effect? But actually all these system changes, their first priority should be those who miss out with the existing system. So I would lobby for that to be something that was upfront in any service change, and that we monitored it to see that any service change actually produced results for those who need it most.
So the next question is one of the ones that's come in beforehand. Cam, you're going to be the first one. This is at least a simple question, although it's a large one. What will you do to address welfare and well-being amongst trainees?
So trainees are really important, but young people coming into the profession are really important. They have ways of seeing the world and solving problems that perhaps we don't see, and they are looking for sustainable solutions. I know trainees are finding it challenging when there are rota gaps and when there aren't psychiatrists around and there are locums, and in some parts of Scotland I know 3/4 of the consultants are locums. In other parts of the country there are very high absences for consultants. They're not getting enough support and training. So fixing the workforce issues more generally, I think we do support trainees quite well, but I think we need to be doing it locally. And I will return to my earlier theme that we can do policy centrally, we can do strategies, but we need to be much more invested in local systems and local trust, talking to local rotations and actually supporting trainees locally and making sure the whole system works. We've got to support everyone in the process, and trainees would benefit enormously from not only having a good experience. We know that they are happier where there is good morale and there are sufficient beds and people are working well and consultants are proud and confident. That's the condition to improve training overall.
It's undoubtedly something we need to do more of. We lose too many trainees, and we lose them because they don't feel sufficiently supported and valued. And of course, there was a major piece of work that the PTC did, very much supported by the college, called Supported and Valued, which actually really outlined an agenda for what needs to happen. And I'm very pleased that that's still continuing to roll out. So first of all, we need to listen to our trainees and see what they think, what they actually want. We need to work through our psychiatric trainees committee. We need to engage them with our overall wellbeing agenda. When I chaired the Wellbeing and Retention Committee before Mihaela was appointed as the Workforce Wellbeing and Retention Associate Registrar, we invited the psychiatric trainees as being a vital group. But I think it comes down to a number of things. We need to make sure that they have got a doable job that gives them enough time to get the training that they deserve and actually patients deserve. So we need to make sure, and that's also about attracting more people into psychiatry. We need to make sure that the situation they work in is safe, so that it's safe to actually speak up when things are not right, but also physically safe and free from bullying. We need to make sure that trainees feel part of real teams that are properly supported, but I think also really importantly that they can contribute to improved services, because you get a great sense of personal value if you can actually carry out a project which is of real benefit to patients. So I think there's lots that we could do, but we must work with our trainees to see what they want.
I think the most important thing is that we really do see them and listen to them. And I think a lot of the reorganisation of services has made that ever more difficult. And I've certainly found that I'm often seeing and listening to trainees who are not even part of our team because they're not getting listened or seen elsewhere. They need their own space, I mean, and a regular space. It's not good enough just to catch somebody in the corridor and say, are you all right? You actually need to book a time that you can sit down and have a considerable period of time. For medical students, I don't know whether Cardiff is unique in this, but I don't think so. We have a very good mentoring system so that someone outside the training, their immediate training, is made available to them. You have a couple of formal meetings a year and get to know each other, and then they can come at any time they wish to discuss other things, and knowing them a little bit. It's the job of the mentor to flag up things that they might be interested in, or to be aware if there are difficult issues arising, like exam results just coming through. And I think perhaps we don't do enough of that for trainees once they've qualified, and that we should have a mentoring system for them too, so that they don't only get their support and advice from within the clinical team that they're working with, but know that they can go elsewhere and deal with matters in confidence.
Thank you. So our next question we'll take from the room oh, Alex, you were quick.
In the light of various media reports and police investigations recently, yesterday our current president, Professor Byrne, called for a public inquiry into institutional abuse in psychiatric hospitals. Now, if you are elected, you may be the one that would need to see this through. So to what extent would you commit to such an inquiry? How do you propose to ensure that it happens and actually results in meaningful improvements in safety for our patients?
Thank you. Adrian, you're the first one.
I think when these reports appear, we obviously need to, first of all, get evidence just to make sure that they are actually exactly what is actually happening. So we need to be clear of our facts. But I think if we see that there seems to be a system issue and things keep happening again and again, I think the college has always argued for openness, that we need to actually open issues up, make sure that somebody who is credible can actually look at it, and that they learn lessons, including, if necessary, that psychiatrists could learn. And what we know is that mostly these are issues to do with systems. And I know that there are many psychiatrists who are working in systems that they feel are unsafe, and that they feel that that could happen to them, that they could actually be subject to an inquiry. So we need to be absolutely clear that when we look at these things, that it's done in the correct culture of learning, so that you can look at system issues and how we can avoid, unless under exceptional circumstances, blaming individuals. So I think it's very important that we support these sorts of things, and that yes, we do learn lessons.
Yes, I think the crucial thing for people, particularly people working in institutions, by which we generally mean hospitals, but we have to keep reminding ourselves that institutionalization can happen in the wider community as well when people lead impoverished lives. I think we have to keep reminding ourselves that we can all be sucked into that. None of us is immune. And one of the key things is that we really do commit to reflective practice. That we have someone from outside the regular team that can regularly sit down with us and look at some of the things that are happening within the team in relation to individual patients and so on. And it just so happens that in forensic psychiatry we're pretty good at that because of course we do have closed institutions and particular reason for being afraid of the risks that involves, and also of being concerned about the potential for being drawn into quite toxic relationships. So we're very committed to reflective practice. It's also, though, worked very well in another context that, and I can only give an example from Wales because it's one that I know best, but where people were involved in the investigation of adverse events and a real commitment to involving the teams properly in everyone being able to have a voice in that. We've talked a little bit about discrimination, and one of the areas that we risk being discriminatory is between people who are qualified mental health workers and people who are not qualified mental health workers. And some of our nursing assistants and our other assistants need much more support, much more involvement, much more engagement if they're going to be able to help us deliver the quality service that we want to deliver. So we need to remember to include them too.
So I'd break it down like this. I think firstly we have to listen very carefully to any reports of abuse, and I would completely support, and I think it's very courageous what Wendy's done, and I would support that and follow it through. Systems can fail if there are not sufficient staff, if the buildings aren't safe, if there's all sorts of morale problems, if they've got the wrong sort of staff who aren't properly trained. There are narratives. I've done quite a lot of research with patients, and they tell me about the hostility they experience ostensibly from very competent and able staff, and trying to understand what that's about is important because they don't really find it easy to tell us this. So I think we would look into it. I also know that when patients experience discrimination, and carers, and this is a research study I'm writing up at the moment, I mean, they don't really feel safe at all. They don't really want to talk about their problems. It's not a safe place for them. They don't feel looked after. They shut down. All of them, even if they're not directly involved in the discrimination, if they spot something happening which is unjust, it's a problem. So injustice in our system needs to be tackled very actively. I think the point that Adrian relates to and Pamela touched on is that it's very tough working with people with complex needs in which there are really challenging emotions being thrown around. So I've trained as a psychoanalytic psychotherapist, and the whole transference and counter-transference issue takes a lot of time to master and to be able to manage. And we're asking people sometimes to work well above their abilities and skill sets. We have to think about this carefully. You know, a bit of mentalization training isn't going to do it. A bit of mindfulness training isn't going to do it. It's really a call for better training and recognizing the skill set of psychiatrists and psychotherapists and psychologists, that these are really demanding tasks that they are asked to undertake, and they are enjoyable as well, but they do get entangled, and you have to be very skilled at managing to disentangle yourself in a safe way and to look after the person and to maintain your ethical values and your ethical position at all times. So I think for me, if there's any suggestion that something isn't right, I'll go back to my suggestion that evidence is in stories and we must listen to it. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question, Pamela, you'll be the first person to answer. This is one of the ones that's been sent in. We know that core adult services are under tremendous pressure around the country, with an ever-increasing demand for care and treatment, making psychiatrist jobs more and more difficult. How will you represent members when you are not on the front line yourself?
Sorry,
Sting in the tail
very
there.
First word, we know that which services?
Core adult services.
Core
It's really about the pressure members are under all around the country. As a president, you sit in an ivory tower, possibly. Still looking for my ivory tower. How will you represent them?
I think that's a very good question, because there is a real risk that can happen. inevitably, becoming president is a near full-time job, as I'm sure Wendy will tell everybody. And so there isn't time to be quite as much on the front line as people currently are. And the front line changes, and it's very important to recognise that the stresses and the benefits that we've experienced in the past are not the same as what people are experiencing now. So I think that keeps coming back to the importance of finding better ways of engaging the college membership all the time, of having our regional representatives very active and making sure that the frontline workers, if that's what we want to call them, have a quick and easy way of getting their concerns into the pool. I think we all understand at some level, but I think we need to have really up-to-date information all the time if we're going to act effectively.
I think it's a really important point, and I think we shouldn't be in an ivory tower. I think we should be visiting trusts and medical directors and getting to know our localities much better. Of course, there's lots of policy work and challenging situations that we have to respond to, but I think we do need to know what the front line is like. I've certainly been a psychiatrist in East London now for over 30 years, and I've seen the challenges, I've seen the shortfalls. When I started work as a medical psychotherapist working with people with personality disorder, I had 90 minutes, the luxury 90 minutes to assess the patient and write up the notes. I now barely get 20, 30 minutes, and most of the time is spent on the computer. And so we just don't get enough time to do it. And I think I return to my earlier point that we've got to think about local systems, and unless we start thinking about implementation and local systems, and the college becomes much better at that, we will fail our members, the majority of them. That's why we're irrelevant to them, because we're busy doing our national policy, which are very important. We've had an incredible success with all the work that we've done, but we've got to do much more locally and be much more involved in implementation, and recognise that different contexts need different areas, different spaces. Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, they need different ways of operating. They're starting off with different resources and assets, different personalities, different laws and policies even. We have to be able to understand that and get involved.
I think it's absolutely right that core mental health services have been neglected, and when there has been investment in some areas, I think that's been particularly painful for people who work in core services, and that's why we've already argued in terms of the long-term plan in England that core services is where the money should go, and that's where I personally have argued. And that is where the money is going. It won't be enough, but I think it's a recognition and a very good start. But I would also say that what about intellectual disability services? What about addiction services? What about eating disorder services? These are surely core services. So we've got to really make sure that we cover the whole spectrum. Now, how are we going to do this? Absolutely, we need to be around the country and around the whole of the UK, listening to our members. I have the privilege that actually I do that a lot. But in terms of answering Cam's issue about the system, the new system in England will be through integrated care systems. We've done some research, published a paper on what good integrated care systems should look like for mental illness. And we are recruiting and training psychiatrists in each division to go out there in our localities to argue the case at local level for people with mental ill health. And that's where the battles have now got to be won. I think we've done actually pretty well in the centre, but actually we've got battles to fight out in the localities, and I think we do have a mechanism to do that. And actually, I'm pretty proud that we've got many of our medical directors coming to the college next week, and we've managed, I personally asked Simon Stevens, the Chief Executive of NHS England, to be there to listen to concerns. And so I think we've done a lot, but we clearly need to do more.
Thank you. So the next question is from the room, from this side. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Actually, we heard a lot about how the stresses that we are exposed to. I just wondered what you would do to ensure that psychiatrists stay well and flourish and do not burn out in the long career that they have?
And Cam, your
Right, in a way I think we've started that conversation really. Getting the system right so that psychiatrists are actually doing a job that's doable with the resources that they need to do the job well, and recognition of the complex task that they undertake. I don't think people really fully appreciate my point about psychiatrists being treated as technicians, carrying risk and not really being given enough resource and time and understanding about what the complex task is that they're trying to undertake. You know, my example, a psychotherapy assessment in half an hour. This is, you know, not easy to do. So I think that's the first thing to do, is get the working conditions right and get the system working, and that's the trusts and medical directors who may be coming to meetings here, but they're not doing it in their localities. You know, they're not actually getting on and changing the way they're treating psychiatrists. And then in terms of burnout, there's a lot of literature on this, managing your own health, making sure that you're physically healthy, making sure that you're taking time away from work, and having a reasonable, what's called work-life wisdom or work-life balance, whichever you choose is a healthier term. There's a great deal that can be done, but they can't really be expected to survive in a system which doesn't allow them to function effectively, doesn't recognise their strengths, doesn't allow them to skill up, doesn't allow them to have time away. So I think that's the way I'd approach it anyway.
Well, well-being and avoiding burnout is absolutely crucial. We know that it's good for patients as well. I mean, who wants to be looked after by somebody who is disillusioned by their job and doesn't feel positive about it? So it's vital for patient care. As I've already said, we set up a workforce well-being and retention committee. Mihaela leads that work. We've got a strategy. And one of the things that we discussed last week was a quality improvement project around workforce well-being. Now, I think the great thing about the methodology behind quality improvement is that it engages people right on the front line. It looks at the issues that are pertinent to them. It seeks solutions that they themselves can find, but it also, you get management buy-in, so people feel empowered. And I think one of the most tricky things at the moment for our workforce is that people feel they've lost control of their immediate environment. So that's very important that we model well-being initiatives in actually empowering people to find them themselves, but they've actually got to be resourced. I think we need to model these things as well in terms of how we run the college. We had our international congress and we had a well-being work stream that went through that. I look forward to seeing you all on the college ride next year, or the run, or whatever you choose to do. So I think that is very important that we need to model it.
Thank you. Well, I'm from Liverpool, so my answer would be never walk alone, never work alone either. It's really important to have people that you can turn to, even if it's only to talk about a difficult situation or a difficult case. I've already made the case for reflective practice in a different context, and I think that's very important. I think too, and this is back to where I'm so committed to the idea of leadership, we need to think about what's happened to psychiatry and maybe medicine more generally in terms of the current climate. Increasingly, we're being asked to practice in a rather formulaic way. Does it fit with NICE guidelines? Does it fit with college guidelines? Are you measuring the right outcomes and all these sorts of things? And I think although we need to be aware of these things, we need to know about the best evidence, we also need to have the capacity to take our own best decisions in the context of the people that are actually in front of us that we need to deliver services for. And I think that's another aspect of the thing that Adrian was touching on, the taking control. If we really feel that it's the system that's running us, that makes it that much more stressful. But above all, don't work alone. Always have someone that you can turn to.
Thank you. So the next question is one that's been sent in, and the first person to answer this will be Adrian. How can we make the case for psychiatry and raise the profile of the profession?
I think we've already been doing that, and I think we need to do more. I mean, first of all, we need visible leaders who are proud to be psychiatrists, who are saying how important mental ill health is to our nation, and how important it is to government and demanding resources. So we need to do that. We need to not just do it. We need to actually have a plan. So we need to be very clear about what we're saying in terms of arguing for more resources, respect for diversity, inclusion. We need to be very clear that we're actually asking for more money, but we also need to be stressing the evidence base around our treatments, which I think often people really don't see. They think that the evidence somehow for our treatments is less than those with physical ill health, and we need to get out there with good stories about the sorts of impact that psychiatrists can have. And I think that's been modelled through the Choose Psychiatry campaign, and we've got the next tranche of Choose Psychiatry that's just about to be there. But we also need to make sure that we listen to our members and engage our members, because it isn't just the people who are actually who are leading an organisation, it's everybody in the organisation that's got to be proud to be a psychiatrist, speak up for those who find they can't access services, argue for money and proper systems locally. So we need to engage our members so they can actually get out there, because we're much more powerful if it's all of us doing it. 18,800 members we have is our latest figures, and you can do a lot with those members if you motivate them sufficiently and give them the tools to do the job.
Thank you.
We have science on the one hand and we have stories on the other. What more could you want? Every person that we meet in psychiatry is different. Every problem is different, because although there would be some similarities with the previous one, it's in a different context. There's never a dull moment. It's always, always, always engaging and interesting. And what higher thing could we say of a topic?
Cam.
So Adrian stole my thunder a little bit there. 80% of the members are not engaged, and of course if you wake them up and they're motivated and interested, what better ambassadors can we have? But we have to work harder at getting them involved and getting them supported. I think we need to give better examples. We're working very hard. The college has done a really good job on this, showing impact from psychiatric interventions in reports. We're using the REF exercises from around the country, the research assessment exercises. We need to improve health literacy of the public and of our colleagues in medicine and nursing and psychology, because they don't get what we do sometimes. The politicians don't get what we do. We've got to work with them. They are influential. They are avenues to power, so we have to explain to them what we're doing. We need scientific advances. You know, one of the problems with psychiatry is that people think there's no kind of radical intervention that we can offer. There have been all sorts of psychosocial interventions. I mean, the psychological therapies themselves have been remarkable. The social interventions that we offer are remarkable. The potential neuroscience paradigm, it's about to change what we do completely. We may not see it in our lifetime, but 20 years down the line, there is emerging evidence that there will be really interesting interventions that could be offered, and already that's helping us refine our stratified medicine approach and understand how even psychological therapies can change brain functioning, and the brain is far more plastic than we thought it was. So we've got lots of exciting science and lots of literacy work to do, and I think the only way to do it is, we can do it as a college, but we have to do it as all members of the college being our ambassadors and working out there with the community, and also in the public health settings. Generally, psychiatrists are excluded from public health settings, and I know Peter Byrne and I and many others, Anya Corzin and so forth, have been trying to get into the public health spaces in local government to explain to people what psychiatrists really do, and that we can help them solve their problems. We can help them improve school mental health, occupational health, health of the population, while people are dying on the railways. That it's not only about being in our institutions, where I suspect many people would like us to stay, but we work out there in the communities as well. We need to get the message across.
Thank you. So now it's this side. All right, Ken.
The role of president is very much a national figure. Can you imagine if you had 15 minutes with the Prime Minister What 3 points would you make in 2020 within what or her?
Right, that goes first to Pamela.
Oh dear. I think I have to be very careful what I say here because it's being videoed, but perhaps the classic would be put your hands where I can see them. And then we can have a discussion. It's very hard because I think that politicians, because of what they do, tend to think of law and legislation before they think of services. And I think it's not an accident that our immediate previous Prime Minister, who was perhaps more interested and committed to mental health issues than many, wanted legislative reform, when in fact a lot of the problems that we were facing were due to difficulties in resources. If you've got core adult services that are underfunded and not able to meet people's problems quickly and effectively, then it's inevitable that more people are going to be compulsorily admitted to hospital because that's the only way that they're going to get the access to the services. So I would want to emphasize the need for service, and I'd want to go back to this point that sometimes the economics of that, we can save money by spending money. That if we spend that money in the right place, we can prevent a lot more expenditure later. We can prevent deaths, we can prevent disabilities by getting treatment in earlier. And we can keep patients and people much more engaged with our work. Part of the reason that patients sometimes find it difficult to engage with us is that the services are not so attractive, and we could do more to make them attractive.
Thank you.
So I would ask firstly whether there's any mental illness in the family, and I would probably take someone who lives with a diagnosis with me because they're probably going to be listened to far more than me. Politicians are, they've got difficult jobs, they've got a large portfolio, it's very hard for them to attend to anything for more than 10 seconds anyway, so, and they'll probably remember the last thing that you've told them. So I would take some rich stories. Evidence doesn't really matter to them, it's too complicated, data tables, it doesn't matter. Stories, rich stories, and the figure that 105 billion a year is what the cost of mental illness is, and if you intervene now you'll save a shed load of money. They could be famous. The problem with politicians is they've got to do something within their period of tenure. So it's very hard for them to see the long-term gains, and it's how we can persuade politicians to be more courageous, see the bigger gains over a longer period, and to not make it mental illness or health generally political football. It is deeply political, of course, but somehow we've got to make the case that we're failing our society, we're failing children, we're failing our older folk by not putting in a system of care that's more effective. But it has to be very simple, brief, and followed up through multiple channels. One channel alone isn't enough. You need to pursue a whole systems approach. And of course, if the media are there, as we've seen recently in the press, you'll get much more attention from them than if you turn up on your own with a data table.
Thank you.
Thanks. I would frame the mental health debate in terms that are attractive to them. And I would first of all ask them what are the things that concern them most about the country, and I suspect they would say the economy, safety, education, families and cohesion. And I would then make the case that if you had excellent mental health services, you could do something to address all of those issues. And I would make a very powerful case to say if you treat mental illness and if you prevent mental illness, then it's good for the economy, it's good for education, it's good for families, and it's good for social cohesion, and it's good for safety. Furthermore, it's the right thing to do. I would want to be very clear. I'd say what do they think is the prime duty of a good leader in relation to a country. I think most of them would say you look after those who are most vulnerable. I would then make the case very clearly that many of the people that we care for are the most vulnerable, so they should be their absolute priority. But I would also, having made that case and hopefully won them over, I would make the case for the social determinants of mental illness. And I would make an absolute plea to say mental illness is not just about treatments that I and members of my team actually deliver. It's about a whole prevention agenda, and make the case for what they can do in terms of early adversity, lack of opportunity, people feeling marginalised. And if you did all that, you would do a lot in relation to mental illness, but you would do a lot in relation to all the other things that concern politicians most.
Thank you. So the next question again is one that's been sent in, and Cam, you're the first one to answer this. Patient care is being jeopardised. We have no beds for the acutely ill, even people who need to be detained. They are waiting in A&E for days and being sent to out-of-area beds miles from home. What would you do about this?
Well, the trust I work in actually does have beds, and the reason they've got beds is they manage them very actively, and they've got very strong clinical leadership. Clinicians who are managers as well as clinicians, and they really understand the decision making, and they're very active in. It's quite novel, really. They're being asked to offer their beds to other trusts as well. So I think a well-functioning system can lead to not having these problems that everyone seems to have. Resources are an issue, but also the way we use resources are an issue. And talking to Tim Kendall, I mean, his view is very much that there isn't a shortage of beds in most places, but there is in some, and we need to be very careful that we don't draw any generalities here. And we need to understand why that is. But we also know why we have greater demand on beds and why our inpatient environments are not particularly therapeutic in many places. They're very challenging places to be. Is we have slowly decimated community services year on year under euphemisms such as austerity or efficiency savings and transformation agendas. The reality is, we've all seen it, I've seen it, year on year, anything between 10 and 20%. Now, obviously, government will dispute those figures and say that that's not what we've done on average, but that is a problem. That's why the bed crisis has gone up as well. So I come back to this being a systems problem again. It's not a one issue problem, and it won't be fixed with a simple solution. We need to put the whole system back together more effectively. And the new investment that's coming into England, obviously that's not going into Ireland or Scotland as such, and they've got different policies and processes there, will be helpful, but we have to be prepared. So my plea again is that we as a college have to be ready to make use of this in the localities, otherwise we will be left out of the equation and we'll still be complaining that we haven't got enough beds.
Well, I think the scenario that is given in the question is an all too common scenario. So it's a reality. It's not just something which is theoretical. And in terms of out of area placements, the government set a target for 2021 that these will be eliminated. And in fact, it's really not changed at all. So I'm afraid we're still in England about 750 out of area placements. So but it isn't just about beds. It's about what we do in terms of preventing crisis. And I think there's some really important points to be made. Wouldn't it be best for patients particularly if you didn't get to a crisis situation in the first place? But then you actually have to look at a whole systems approach. So alternatives to admission, proper crisis services, proper support in people's homes, and alternative safe places that people can go to. I think we have got to a situation where it's looking likely that we will need more beds in some areas. I met with Chief Executive of my trust last week, and it's very clear that in Devon, for example, we do need more beds, and actually they've recently commissioned a psychiatric intensive care unit. So I think people do recognise that sometimes there is a need for beds, and I would refer people to the CRISP report. We commissioned the report. It was independent. Lord Crisp, who was the Chief Executive of NHS England, and in that it was recommended that there would be, each area should have a capacity and flow analysis, and they should come up with their own solutions for what were obviously their own challenges. That unfortunately never happened, and that's something that we really need to argue, and we need to make sure it's not just a one size fits all, but that there are some real answers to these questions, because it's all very well if you're a patient, you could say, well, it's not just about beds, but that's no good for a patient if you're then sent 200 miles away. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, I'm glad Adrian said some of that, because I'm not at all sure that we've got the calculations of what we actually need done correctly, and I think we may need to review that further. I think that one of the things that may have happened in the conversations about parity of esteem is that we've tended to think that therefore people with mental health problems are going to need almost exactly the same sort of inpatient accommodation as people with physical health problems, so that they would expect to be in perhaps overnight at a push and maybe 2 or 3 days, and then go back to the bosom of a loving family who can help them with their rehabilitation. Now, for a few people it's like that, but it's very, very unusual that at least most of the patients I've ever encountered can go back to the family as quickly and easily as that. And that's what we have to take account of. It may not be that they all need to be in hospital. It may be indeed that there are other possibilities for them, but then we don't have those other possibilities. Just sending them back to a ghastly bedsit or a bed and breakfast in Eastbourne is not going to solve their problems or keep them well. We really do need to go back to this holistic thinking.
Thank you. We've got just 5 minutes left, so we'll have one more question from this side of the room. Agnes.
The avoidable,
Yes.
Thank you. So the avoidable deaths of patients with eating disorders have been repeatedly reported by the media. And 2 years ago, the Parliamentary Health Ombudsman produced a report of the investigation of 3 people who died unnecessarily. And they made a number of useful recommendations. There are 2 which I think relevant to the college. One of them is improving medical education for all doctors, and the other one is about having funding for eating disorder services to achieve parity of esteem, and I suppose parity across the age range. And I would like to know how the next president can help us achieve that.
Adrian, you're first with this one.
Well, thank you, Agnes, for raising that. I mean, this is a really important issue. We know that eating disorders are the most deadly disorders that we have. So this is a really serious matter, and we know that the devastating effect that this can have on the individual, their family, but also those who are trying to provide care. It's absolutely clear that we've got some very experienced clinicians doing some very good work out there, and we must learn from the best. But it's absolutely clear that we have not invested enough in our core services and in terms of our specialist services. And I think one of the inquiries have shown is that it's a whole system approach, and it's the ultimate interface between mental health and physical health, and that's where often the issues are. So what I would be wanting to do would be to lobby for more funds. I think eating disorder has fallen behind, but also through integrated care systems, particularly in England, and actually we have got similar setups in other parts of the United Kingdom, that I would want this to become a high-level objective for integrated care systems, because this is precisely the sort of issue that those systems should be able to sort, because they are all about integration between primary and secondary care, integration between social care and health, and integration between the sort of acute trusts and the mental health services. And that's fully borne out in these inquiries. So that's what I would be lobbying for.
Thank you. 3 things really. One is that you refer to avoidable deaths. And I think you shouldn't be afraid to take that platform and talk about just what the cost of an avoidable death is. And that that's something to set against the cost of services. It would be cheap at the price to provide decent services. The second thing goes back to the thinking that we were doing about education and training, and thinking that the curriculum reform is an opportunity to make sure that certain things get into every part of the curriculum, and I would include general medicine and surgery in that as well, because unless you can recognise an eating disorder, you can't even begin to think of doing something about it. And I suspect that there's a lot of eating disorder that goes unrecognised until it's too late to do very much about it. And the third thing, and I particularly welcome movement that I think is coming from you to an extent, is that we still tend to think of eating disorders very much in terms of anorexia nervosa and similar problems. But of course the country is facing huge problems with eating disorders of the other extreme, not just bulimia, but just the country has lost the plot with its eating habits. And I think that's a very important thing on which the eating disorders faculty could take leadership, and should. But you'll need resource, of course you will.
So it's a really important problem. Thank you for raising it, and I think it is partly a manifestation of how poorly we're trained to understand nutrition and the interaction between nutrition and physiology, biology and society. We like to see it as a single illness or disorder, but of course it's a multifaceted presentation and therefore often misdiagnosed, missed completely. People ending up personality disorder services, or being treated for depression, or being given psychotherapy that isn't going to work, or being given family therapy, and no one really getting to understand. And we have lost a lot of the specialist services, even the adolescent services, in which there were inpatient units that used to provide eating disorder interventions, which I was involved in my training. That they don't really exist that much these days. So I've been entirely behind it, but I think education is important. Wider literacy is important for the public as well, and to make people understand the challenges. I think we have to instill in people that there is a value base of healthcare, and we have to have some ethical practice, because I think it's easy for commissioners and policymakers. They've got a very difficult job. They've got to square the circle. It's very easy to find ways to justify resourcing what they resource and not resourcing what other people think they should be resourcing. But I think ultimately it comes down to providers themselves in their localities, and we will now, in England at least, if not in other jurisdictions, have the powers to do that, to have judgments that break free of the algorithms and guidelines, that we can use the resources. And I think eating disorders are amongst the many things they've said that we should be looking at more carefully and providing services. So we would certainly be championing that, but I think it needs an integrated approach, and I think the understanding of the relationship between mind and body is so poor, even in the professions, even amongst some psychiatrists, that it's a real challenge. So the education bit is really important, but it's not just knowledge, it's a ethical, developmental, deep-seated educational experience that people need. Facts aren't going to do it, and a brief online intervention educational package isn't going to do it either.
Thank you. So that has used up all our time. Thank you so much to the three candidates. I think you've all done brilliantly. I really don't think I could have answered any of those questions at your stage, so well done. Thanks to everybody in the room. I'm sorry you didn't all get to ask. There are some drinks now. What are you saying? Sorry? I can't hear what you're saying. Concluding remarks. Right. Oh, right. The concluding remarks are 3 minutes. It's not on my briefing. Right. It's fallen off the briefing. Okay. Sorry. Did you know about that? You've got 3 minutes to. Yeah. So should we go in alphabetical order again? Cammy, can you do? Do you want? Yes. We go to the lectern.
So one of the most critical criteria by which the next president was going to be chosen, according to Twitter feed and Wendy's encouragement, is which pets they have. Regrettably, I don't have cats at the moment, but I did have cats at one stage, and so I think I qualify just about. But at the moment it's bunny rabbits, although there is a campaign on to get a cockapoo at the moment. So what will I do? Resource more local and regional training for leadership and influence, reinvigorate pride, courage and collaborative leadership skills for psychiatrists. Recognise your input and make sure that we are properly connected, that we're listening to what you want and carefully implementing. We've got to deliver on the policy priorities. And one of the theories of change is that we have to be capable, we have to be motivated, and we have to make use of opportunities. And if we can get those three things together, we can make change effective. Capability is what I've been talking about and what education's about and what all the systems stuff's about, preparing ourselves and making sure we're ready for the investment when it arrives, watching for those policy windows that open up for 6 months in which we can influence government and being prepared. Motivation is a real problem because we're all struggling with the current climate in services and the challenges we're facing and the economy generally, not to mention the political climate and the peculiar extreme views that are abounded. But there are so many opportunities to address mental health issues, both in the framework for England, the occupational stress and student mental health literature. People are really recognising how much a problem it is for young people in universities. I'm at a medical school, and Corsian's been doing a load of work trying to help young people to recognise their health problems and putting it into a professional framework, that it's a professional responsibility to tackle your mental health problems. We have an opportunity, if we properly accept the role we have in public health, to work with local government, with policymakers, with police, with all agencies out there, addressing where the chip shop opens, that it doesn't open up next to the school, helping people think differently about the use of alcohol, and making sure all our networks are activated. And we should be active and proud of what we're doing. Collectivism and collaboration, and that I come back to my anthem really, that we need to be united. There are too many divisions in the college. A united college, a more influential college, and an inclusive college. And I think with those elements, we can do great things. And I hope to be able to lead that. Obviously, I hope you vote for me. If you don't vote for me on your first offer, please put me down for your second. But of course, I'll... interesting process. It's been a lot of fun. And of course, I will work with any of my esteemed colleagues in achieving the best outcomes, both for the membership and for our patients and carers. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming. Again, I've really enjoyed tonight. You come into these meetings and you think, how am I going to feel at the end of it? Am I going to feel more or less likely to want to be the president? I honestly didn't know how I was going to feel, but I can honestly tell you that I feel more passion now than I felt when I actually came into the room. And that's because of the richness of the discussion that we've had here, which reflects the richness of the work that we do. And I wish some of the people that we are convincing to become psychiatrists, they could have been sitting here listening to these discussions and saying, these are the issues that concern psychiatrists, these are the issues that psychiatrists can actually sort out. So I've got a real role in sorting out. So I would very much want to be your president. I've written some things down here. I've got clinical experience, policy experience, political experience, commissioning experience, media experience, management experience, lived experience, and college experience. The only experience that I haven't got is to be president of your college. And if I'm not president, that's it. So I'm not going to hang around. So it's either that or I will go back to Devon and continue to care for my patients in a clinical capacity only. So thank you for at least listening to me and giving me at least that opportunity. Thank you.
Well, it's exciting that we've had such engagement and such interesting questions. It's illustrative, I think, of what can happen when membership is much more engaged. It does make us think, it does make us develop. We keep coming back, I think, to what we're good at. Our ability to listen, to be aware, to formulate a bit of a position from that, to test that out, to adjust it, to be becoming all the time, to remind ourselves that we're never quite there. There's always something else that will take us a little bit further forward. And I've certainly been doing quite a bit of becoming myself tonight. I think the building esteem that I'm so keen, indeed we're all keen on, is partly about that listening process, but it's also about recognition of how wonderful psychiatry is in that it brings together science and the amazing personal stories of the people that we work for. And we need to ensure that we not only recognise that, but we develop the future. We need restoration of our academic base, and we need more research. Being more savvy and understanding the resources, well, we've heard some good examples of that. Avoidable deaths, they shouldn't be happening. Avoidable morbidity, and many of our patients could get back to actually contributing themselves to society, and of course making contributions is what gives people esteem. So we need to have so much more understanding about how well invested resources would be if they can help patients turn around. We need to safeguard and develop expertise, and we've heard another area, eating disorders, where we probably do need to develop very considerably, and I'd flagged substance misuse in particular. So we need to use every opportunity we have to get mental health to the centre of things, to keep it there, to make it even more so. We've made reference to doing that through the curriculum development so that we are there with the rest of medicine as well. We need to remember that parity doesn't always just mean being the same, that our patients have different and sometimes more needs than many other patients, and we need to be able to meet those. And above all, I think we need to be not just ready to work with investment if it happens, but we need to go get it. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, I think we actually have finished now. Yep. So thank you all for coming, and please stay and have a drink, and you can carry on grilling the candidates. Thank you.